Alright, so we're going to look at three different witnesses who testify about the life of Paul. There's Luke, there's the Bereans, and there's Peter. So first of all, who can tell me about the testimony of Luke?
Anyone? 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 Class? Anyone? 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 Anyone?
I couldn't find Paul mentioned anywhere in the book of Luke. Yeah, Luke is one of the four Gospels, right? Didn't all that stuff happen before Paul ever came into the picture? You know what? That's a good point. But I wonder which one of you can tell me how it is that we know so much about the life of Paul. Where do we find this information?
Oh, that's easy. That's in the book of Acts.
Exactly. Now, what are some of the specifics we learn about Paul in the book of Acts?
Well, we learn about what he was like before he became a Christian.
That's right. He was directly responsible for the death of Stephen, the very first martyr.
Yeah, didn't he used to go around persecuting and killing Christians and stuff? Not cool, man.
Yes, you're right. Definitely not cool. But then what else do we know about Paul from the book of Acts?
Well, we know about his conversion to Christianity.
And we also know about all of his travels to spread the gospel. So basically just about everything we know about Paul, his history, his conversion, his ministry adventures, almost every bit of that comes from what's written in the book of Acts. There's 28 chapters in that book, but Paul shows up in chapter 7 and he stays all the way to the end.
But can we trust the book of Acts?
That's a good question, because it just so happens that the person who wrote the book of Acts is also the very same person who wrote the book of Luke.
For reals?
The book of Acts and the book of Luke are both written to a man named Theophilus.
Theo what?
Theophilus. Are you sure that's not just some critic telling us how awful the television show The Office is?
Hey!
I'll have to pray about that. But in the meantime, who wants to read Luke chapter 1 verses 3 and 4?
It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto you in order, most excellent Theophilus, so that you might know the certainty of those things in which you have been instructed.
So this is part of the introduction in the book of Luke, and it's written to Theophilus. Now, who wants to read the introduction in the book of Acts? That's chapter 1, verses 1 and 2.
The previous account I made, O Theophilus, of all that Jesus began both to do and teach, until that day on which he was taken up, after he, through the Holy Ghost, had given commandments to the apostles whom he had chosen.
So we can see that the book of Luke tells us about the life, death, burial, and resurrection of our Messiah. But then the book of Acts is the sequel. And it's written by the same guy and to the same guy. And the book of Acts tells us about the actions of the apostles. And of course, the rest of the church. So it gives the account of everything that happened directly after the resurrection.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the author of the book of Luke and the author of the book of Acts is the same dude. And it's probably Luke?
And that means that Luke is the one who tells us almost everything we know about the life and times of Paul.
So if we can't trust what the book of Acts tells us about the life of Paul, then we can't trust what the book of Acts tells us about anything.
And that means we can't trust anything the book of Luke says either. And around here, that's what we like to refer to as
a bad thing.
Okay, so that's one witness, Luke. Now we need to call in a second one. And that would be the Bereans. Ha ha!